It'll probably pick up your feet. You haven't got to go through all those pages, have you, Ivan?
It's only one.
That's all right.
On top of that. That'd be quotes. We can't.
Right.
No, all it is just a, just talking about. For instance, school days. School days. What about Betty's school days? Any ideas on things that happened in your school days? Happiest days of your life?
Rubbish.
Well, they were in the wartime really, so they're slightly different to normal school days.
Mm.
I can remember we used to go and have we used to go out and have a sort of practices when the bombs were going to come down. The air raid shelters. What else did we do? Oh, I can't really remember an awful lot.
Were there any teachers that you can...
Yes, well, there were two teachers that were in the Truth. One was Mabel Broughton, and the other one was Eileen Atkins. They were both in the Truth, and they ran a youth club at the school. So quite a number of the children that I grew up with went to the youth club. And a Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
As well. So my school days are wrapped up with youth club and Sunday school until I went to Acox Green Youth Club, where I met a certain person at the age of 15 who took one look at me and
well, what it is, you're going on to other subjects I've got in life. So when it doesn't matter, when on school, it's try and stick with school. I know it comes into it, and then there'll be wartime. That's another one. I hope to go through the thing then. I really personal, transport, holidays, hobbies, music, school. So if we can, yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter because I can cut it in and out. Let me just see if that's okay. Yeah, I think your chair could come a little bit over there, so you're a bit nearer to Ken. Just bring the chairs together.
you're going to edit this, aren't you?
Oh, that's right, yeah. Oh, yeah, well, I mean, yeah. Oh, definitely, yeah. Yeah, that's okay.
Right, school days. I went to a very modern school, and the education was very good. It was a happy time. One of the things I can remember vividly was the opportunities I had for painting. I can see myself now as a little child with an easel in school, painting a picture on a Friday afternoon. Another memory that I have of school is taking a bit of polish on a Friday afternoon to polish my desk, which all the children were asked to do. We took great pride in our school. And that's about all really I can remember.
Oh, that's on you, yeah. What about you, Ken?
My recollection of school days, I was at school, as was Betty, before the war. We lived in Birmingham, and the local school was about 2 or 3 miles away, Acox Green School, which was a school that my brother went to. My brother was 13 years older than I. But I can remember, and I'm not sure whether Betty had the same experience, but we actually used slates to write on.
Yes, that's right.
Chalk and slate. I do remember eventually we had exercise books, but my first experience was of slates. I suppose that they were happy days really, because they were carefree, although as we grew older one became conscious that a war was imminent. But one amusing story, we lived in a road called Mayfield Road, and just up from us, about 100 yards up on the other side, was an elderly brother and sister of the name of Lowe. Now, Ted Lowe was an uneducated man. He could neither read nor write when he got married. But his wife taught him to read, and eventually Ted Lowe brought in over 100 people into the truth, including my mother. He died, and Sister Lowe used to come across quite regularly to see my mother. And she complained bitterly on one occasion about this young lad called Ken, who used to walk in the gutter and get his feet wet. And Betty will remember that some of the winters when we were at school were very, very severe. And I can remember going to school with the snow over the top of my welly boots. And Sister Lowe came and told my mother that Kenny was walking in the gutter and getting his feet wet. Now, I objected most strongly to this because there was no way that Sister Lowe could see down the road and see Kenny walking in the gutter. So that's one recollection of school days. We had a teacher of the name of Sergeant who was in the special constabulary, and he took us for PE in the playground, and all that entailed was marching up and down the school playground military fashion, and he was preparing us for our time when we were called up into the army. From that, I went to grammar school, got into the grammar school, as did Betty. And I've got some happy memories and not so happy memories of school days.
Did you ever, corporal punishment was around then, so did you ever get the cane or was threatened with the cane or?
Never! Never!
Right.
I got given lines, I must, I can't remember, I must learn to spell a particular word correctly.
But did you see any punishment like
Oh, yes.
this? Yes, that's me. It
Yes,
was
we
around.
saw it, yeah. Yeah, with a cane.
Yeah.
It was hanging up behind the desk,
It-
alongside the board on the wall.
It was a deterrent.
Oh, it
sat
was a
there.
deterrent, yeah. Yeah.
And it worked.
Oh yes, it worked. Yeah, yeah, but I was a good child.
Right.
Didn't last. It didn't last.
Thank you.
But you both mentioned, funny enough, that the school days, and it was in wartime. So obviously after that, then war came upon us, like it did. And can you sort of recollect anything from the war years?
Yeah. Do you want to start?
One of the things I can remember, we spent a good many nights in the air raid shelter when the raids were on, and after breakfast in the morning I often used to go before school along the roads to see if I could find pieces of shrapnel
Oh yes.
and collect them and take them to school.
That was one of the hobbies, you know.
Yes,
Absolutely.
we had a big ACAC gun establishment not far from where we lived, and during the night you could hear them going off, firing at the planes going over, and we could see the fires in Birmingham. The sky lit up at night.
Right.
Spent many a night in a little air raid shelter.
We used to have an Anderson shelter in the garden, which my father had put in, and it was the custom that we went every night to sleep in the air raid shelter, and because it was fairly big, we used to have the neighbours in as well. One thing that I remember quite vividly, and it was upsetting to me at the time, my mother found to sleep in the air raid shelter claustrophobic, and she refused to do it. So she would stay in the house. And as a child that worried me because I was fearful that if we had a direct hit on the house, my mother would go. But I remember my mother's answer when I questioned her. She said, if I'm to go, I will go. And I put my trust in the Lord rather than in the air raid shelter. Now, that was her reply. But like Betty's experience, we lived very close to the main line railway from Birmingham to South Wales, and a lot of the heavy goods went down the railway line. And I remember vividly one night there were 8 houses directly opposite us which were bombed and people were killed. And I remember the next day going across, walking across the bomb site, trying to find pieces of shrapnel from the bombs that actually did it. But it was a common experience.
Oh, right.
We lived every night with the ACAC guns, the searchlights, and the German planes coming over at night. It was, you know, it was something that you experienced.
You mentioned the fact that the air raid shelter, you went in there every night. Over a period of how long was that you used the air raid shelter, would you say?
I would think about three years probably. And it was
every night for 3 years.
Oh, yeah. And you know, you could, as was said, you could see the fires from the city. All the city was ablaze, and the factories that we were surrounded by were.
What age were you at the wartime?
Well, I was born in 31.
Between 7 to 14.
Yeah,
Right,
that's right. Yeah,
Growing up, yeah.
we grew up with it.
Yeah. Just
And-
yeah.
And the Russians, of course, were something that you had to live with. I can't remember the quantities now, but you know, if you had an ounce of sweets a week, that was as much as you got. Same with fat, sugar,
Biscuits,
butter.
anything.
Clothes?
I've queued many a time for a banana. 1 or 2 bananas.
And we had what was called the national loaf, which was a wholemeal loaf, which was not very nice. But I don't think it was Russian in the early days. I think it was Russian later on. But we were fortunate, Ivan, because at the bottom of the garden, behind the air raid shelter, my father had an allotment, and Dad was very keen on the allotment. So we grew a lot of our own vegetables, potatoes, celery, onions, salads, rhubarb. We had raspberry and blackcurrant canes. So that was nice because that supplemented some of the rations, which
Things that you couldn't get. So
you couldn't get.
Everyone had to dig their gardens up.
yeah.
Dig for victory.
Yeah, I remember.
Vegetables.
I can only remember what people told me on that one. But
Yeah, sure. Looking back, Ivan, it was a very strange experience. It was hard. It was a bit frightening when the bombers came over. But you look back and you talk to other people. People generally, not necessarily people in the truth, but people in the world were much more friendly then than they are today. And there's a camaraderie really. So people helped each other.
With this war and then after the war, obviously as you got older, I imagine though conscription was a problem for you, or you had to go through conscription and you had to do
yes,
something. So did that affect you at all?
Yes, although I was apprenticed, which really meant that although I was called up at 18, I had deferment until I completed the apprenticeship.
Right.
But I registered as a CO, conscientious objector. So the actual tribunal didn't occur until I was 21. And because we lived very near to John Carter, who was one of the former editors of the Christadelphian, we used to go to the Birmingham Central meeting on the bus with John Carter and his family. And John Carter went with me to the tribunal, which was a bit daunting, although I got off reasonably well. They put me on the list of COs, providing I did either hospital work or land work, and in the event I elected to go on the land because we were living at that time at Lichfield in Staffordshire. So I worked for 2 years on the land, digging ditches and putting in land drainage schemes for the Staffordshire War Agricultural Committee, as it was.
Was that enjoyable? Did you enjoy doing that?
Strangely enough, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it. It's hard work. It was manual work. I got blisters on blisters on blisters. But it was a healthy life, and I worked with some decent guys.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the brethren from Lichfield meeting worked with me, was a supervisor. George Hackett was his name. But yeah, it was a healthy life. A healthy life.
Betty, when you first got to the age of, I would imagine, 15, 16, and did you go to work? Or did you not go to work? Or what did you do then? Did you?
I left the grammar school and I went to a college and trained as a legal secretary. And when I left the college, my mother and father at that particular time, both of them were in the truth, had moved to Bewdley. My father helped run the home, Winterdyne. So I went to Bewdley when I left the college in Birmingham and got a job in the local solicitors. And I worked there until just after we were married.
Right.
So that was my first job.
Yeah.
Working for this
Solicitors.
this lawyer, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned that you did this work until you both met. So you were saying early on that you met early years. So when did you first meet each other?
When we were 8.
8.
When we were 8, about 8 years, well, even earlier probably. Ken's parents and my parents both belonged to Central Meeting, and his mum and dad used to sit down at the front, and my mum and dad sat a little bit further back, and there was this little boy who sat between his mum and dad and used to turn round and pull funny faces at me and got told off by his mother.
Absolutely, I was all getting told off by my mother.
Yes, that was when we sort of knew each other first of all. But then when I was about 14, my aunt and uncle at Acox Green suggested that I went across on a Tuesday night to the youth club there to meet other young people. So I joined what we used to call the CYC in those days.
Yeah.
And that was where I met Ken first of all. And we became what was known as an item when we were about 15.
But they didn't refer to us in those days as being items.
No.
We would just... The old-fashioned word was we were sweethearts, weren't we?
Yes.
That was the word we used.
Yes.
We were sweethearts.
Yeah.
And we never looked back.
Right.
Never looked back.
So that was when you sort of first met, and then
At the youth club, yeah.
when you got sort of, let's call it more serious, how long was, what would you say, the courtship?
Oh golly. Well, we didn't get married until after Ken had finished on the land.
That
So we
was
were 22, 21, 22.
I was 23 when I finished.
You were, yeah, 23.
Yeah.
I was 22.
Right.
And
The-
then we were
yeah.
married.
There's an interesting little bit which may interest the brothers and sisters. I received instruction for baptism by a brother who was really Dr. Thomas Scholar. So I received my instruction based upon Elpis Israel and Eureka, and I have to say that has stood me in good stead over the years. And during the time that I worked on the land, I actually read Eureka from cover to cover over the 3 volumes. And in those days, alas, they have gone, but my memory was very good in those days and I could remember an awful lot. Sadly, that's changed. But there's an interesting subplot to all that Betty's been saying to you. We decided, possibly during the end of our courtship and just prior to getting married, we thought about going to Australia.
Oh.
And because Betty lived at Winterdyne, we actually bought a plot of land in Kidderminster to put a bungalow on. And Betty, being the talented girl that she is, she designed the bungalow to go onto that plot. So when we got married, we negotiated with builders as to how much it would cost to put up this bungalow. And sadly, they all wanted rather more than we could afford. So in the end, we sold the plot and we decided to go to Australia. And Betty had got relatives in Brisbane. So to cut a long story short, we talked to Australia, we made application to the Australian government, and I'd got a job to go to in Australia. We'd almost got a sailing date. We were due to go out within 8 weeks, and my father's health broke. He had his first angina attack, and in those days angina was probably more serious than it is now. And because of family circumstances, I said to Betty, I can't go, because if anything happens to Dad, my brother, because of his problems, would not be able to look after Mother. And I said, I've got to think of Mum because there's no one else. And that was sad really, because Betty's mum and dad were going to come with us.
Oh, yeah.
So I had to take a decision which affected, four lives here and a lot of lives in Australia. But as people will know, 3 years ago, we actually went out to Australia to see the people that we would have grown up with and matured with.
Mm. You were saying about the land and that you bought for getting married. So what year did you get married? And
54, wasn't it?
where did you